So comment on here, and if you're watching live, give me a little like swirly eye emoji. And if you are watching on the replay, then give me a thumbs up emoji. So today I've got Jennifer here, and she is a hypnotherapist, and she's going to be telling us kind of what it is and who it's for. And how it works. And I'm excited to dive into this. Do you want to introduce yourself a little bit more?
Absolutely. So I'm Jennifer, and I began this type of work with the field of herbalism. So I actually started back when my oldest was a little kid. She had all sorts of gut issues. And so that sort of began the journey, because as a mom, I thought, I've got to help her. And we were going from doctor to doctor and not finding answers. And so started studying for myself, went through a master's in herbalism program back when she was probably 3 or 4. And then during COVID, upped that certification to a practitioner's, a clinical herbalist practitioner certification, so that I could practice it. And then I started working with clients. And when I started working with clients, I realized very quickly that I needed more tools, because I could approach things from the body, but so many of the blockages that I was seeing were energetic or in the mind. So I wanted to have training from an energy perspective and from a mind perspective to kind of balance and go through all those doors. So I started with Reiki training and became certified, and am now a Reiki master. And then added to that the clinical hypnotherapy, because I was always interested in mind body psychology, taught psychology for a long time. So it was really neat to add that whole aspect to what I was already kind of offering.
That is so cool. Thank you for sharing with us kind of how you got into this. And if you're just joining us now, if you would give us like a little swirly eye emoji if you're watching here live, and if you're watching on the replay, give us a little thumbs up. So my first question for you is, like, what is hypnotherapy? And then maybe some of the common ideas or myths that really are not the kind of hypnotherapy that is therapeutic.
Sure. Yeah. So you like science? You want me to go?
Yeah.
You want me to go scientific deep of what hypnotherapy
I want
is?
science. Science is always a heck yes for me.
Okay. I'm a diagram then. Hopefully we can geek out and not lose too many people.
I can't actually see that. Oh, you're going to draw something on there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing on there yet.
I was like,
so
I
you're
can't
good
see anything.
If you see a blank. No, we're going to draw as we go. Hopefully, you know what? Maybe I need a darker pen. So let me know if you can't see this. But so if we're looking at this circle as kind of like what we come into life with. So when we're born, this is our mind, right? And so we come in with a primitive mind. So this is this little space right down here, the primitive mind. And this is our fight or flight. So all the instinctual responses that we have. So a baby crying to get fed, our sucking reflex, all of these things that are just instinctual that you don't learn, you come with. So that's the primitive part of the mind right down here. And it's just a small percentage of where we make decisions from. They're just the autonomic, the body's running and it's doing its thing. It's the primitive mind that controls that. Sometimes in different theories of mind, this is called the alligator mind or the reptile mind. Then between the ages of 0 and 8, we have our subconscious mind online. So these are when we're forming all of these associations. Our critical mind doesn't come online yet. So we believe a lot of what we're watching and seeing. We're observing the world. We're just kind of sponges then, and we're taking everything in. And so because experience is subjective, two people can experience an interaction with the dog very differently, or with food association or smells or things that we experience as children and form these positive or negative charges towards. And so if you're a little boy whose family has a family dog and your dog bites you as a child, and the dog, the family immediately says, that dog's got to leave. We can't have a violent dog in the house. And you have this association in your mind, dogs equal violence or fear. And then you have another family where the little boy has a dog and it's a very loving dog and it can pull its ears and it can roll all over it. And it's just a loving, soft, gentle dog. And so in our 20s, if a dog runs into a room, that boy that had the good experience might get down on the floor and play with the dog, where the other is going to back up and feel some fear at that invading his space. So these are just associations that we pick up, and sometimes that's a conscious thing and sometimes it's not, and we don't always know or remember where those triggers come from. So our body might have a response to something later in life that we're not really sure why it's feeling that way, right? Or we may be aware and be able to name it and say, oh yeah, I had an incident with a dog when I was 6. But other things are more subtle, so they're not as easy to have as memories, and so we may not remember why our body feels a certain way around something. Smells are like that. They're very subtle, and they're one of the most memory-inducing senses. So it's all connected to the limbic system. We smell something that maybe we smelled when we were 4, and we don't have that as a conscious memory, but our subconscious does. And so we make a lot of these decisions based on our subconscious memories that isn't even our critical mind tapping in and bringing in logic and reasoning and all of that. So between 0 and 8, to go back to our mind diagram here, this makes up the subconscious, and there are these positive and negative associations. Okay, but this is responsible for 88% of our decisions. So if we're not aware of what that is, of what's firing in our subconscious, we're making 88% of our decisions based from this part of our brain. And that's the part of the brain that hypnosis works to access. So our critical mind comes online about age 9. And this is our will, this is our decision making, this is logic, this is the critical. My pen's running out, sorry about this, but you can hopefully kind of see. So this is the top half. This is where we have all of that logic, and it's like when you're 0 to 8 and your parents say Santa Claus is coming, and you get so excited and Santa Claus is coming, and then around age 9 you're like, wait a minute, I saw some presents in my parents' closet. Wait a minute, I saw carrots in the fridge, and now the carrots are on the front porch chewed up. Okay, like we start making these associations, and our critical mind comes online and says, hold on, let's look at this. And the critical mind's healthy. It protects us in many ways, and our body and our subconscious is always trying to protect us too. But when we figure out how they work together to inform our decisions, now we can make decisions from a much more balanced place. And so when I'm working with a client, they show up and they're responsible for their 12%, their critical mind. And then I'm going to work with that 88%, reprogramming those subconscious messages and really kind of uncovering where are they from? What started, that original fear thread, or that original positive association that's now hard to break. Because we have positive associations that we make during those years that can become negatives. So like if you ever had a parent who would give you a piece of chocolate cake when you were sad, you skin your knee or something happens or you have a bad day and they say, oh, come in, let's get some cake, or let's get you a little treat or something like that. Then we start to associate that as a positive thing. It's comforting.
Yeah.
The smell of it, cooking in the kitchen, all of that is these little positive associations. But then when we hit, 36 years, our metabolism starts to tank, and that chocolate cake rolls by us and it smells so good, and maybe we've had a stressful day. That's when that positive association isn't so positive anymore. because
Mm,
it's going to kick in and be something that's harder for us to break that association of comfort and cake.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
So we are looking at things that are used to firing together, comfort and cake. It's not the cake, it's not the chemical, it's not the flour, sugar, whatever.
mm-hmm.
It's the emotion that's tied to that that's hard to break. And it's that way with most of the choices that we make. There's an emotion connected to those. And so we choose these things based on this, whether it's known, which feels like a positive, or
Mm-hmm.
unknown, which feels like a negative,
Mm.
and where it sits in that positive or negative spectrum of our subconscious.
Okay, so we have the primitive brain. And if you're just joining us now, and you're here watching us live, give a little like swirly eye emoji. And if
Mm-hmm.
you are watching on the replay, then give us a little thumbs up. I've got Jennifer here with me, and we are talking about hypnosis and hypnotherapy. And we were just kind of talking about the different parts of the brain. And you've got a small part of the brain that is the primitive brain. And this is basically responsible for reflexes
Mm-hmm.
and fight or flight. And when a baby is hungry, they cry. And it's just these things that don't necessarily require thinking. They just happen.
Instinctual, right?
Yeah. And then we have another part of the brain that is, I think you said 88% of the
Mm-hmm.
brain, um, that is like really developing ages 0 to 8.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part of the brain that you're working with in
Correct.
hypnosis.
Right.
And then you have this other 12% of the brain, that the client is like kind of more the conscious brain, perhaps,
Mm-hmm.
or the critical mind.
The critical, yes, the critical mind.
Um, And so tell me a little bit about, um, now that we understand what these different brain parts are, how like would one come into a session, and how exactly do you work with these brain parts, and what happens in a hypnotherapy
Sure.
session? And yeah.
Yeah. So we actually go into hypnosis every day. It's a very natural state. It's not actually something that, it can feel very scary, but it's
Mm,
something that we go in and out of throughout our day already normally. It's a natural state, and it's that state between the alpha and theta brain state. So the theta brain state is that stage you're in right before you fall asleep, where you're like kind of present and aware and kind of dreamy, but you're not totally out. You're very
mm-hmm,
aware of what your thoughts are and what you're thinking. And then the alpha state is that really relaxed state.
mm,
So in meditation, you're going to go into an alpha state. When you do breath work and you're really trying to calm your breathing and ground, that's an alpha state. So we're looking at that state that's right between, and it's a very fine line between
mm,
alpha and theta. And once it crosses into theta, that's that what they would call the creative state right before you fall asleep,
mm,
where you have all those ideas come up
yeah,
and your
yeah.
brain's kind of reprogramming. So that's that state that we're getting into in hypnosis. But we get there before sleep, and we also get there when we're overloaded. So
Mm,
when we're in sensory overload, if you've ever had that feeling of just kind of like zoning,
mm-hmm,
where you're there, but you're not quite fully
yeah,
critical mind there, or when you go on autopilot and you start driving to the place that you always drive,
yeah.
that's that part of the brain. So it's that brain state that hits message overload, either because the environment is overstimulating, or our body is overstimulated,
Mm,
or our subconscious and our conscious are at war, because sometimes our critical mind wants something that our subconscious doesn't, and
mm,
all of that feels like overwhelm or overload. And when you get to that place, your mind automatically goes into a state of hypnosis. So when you're scrolling on the internet and you've got these 15-second sound bites
mm,
of reels, and you've got all this visual like input coming in, and you're
mm-hmm.
also sitting there, so you're kind of in that place where you're zoning into alpha.
Mm.
Now you're going to hit that state of hypnosis where you're suggestible.
And
So
maybe
that's a
kids
great time for
are
an
walking
ad.
around in the
Right.
background, and a dog is barking, and the neighbor is mowing the lawn, and your partner or roommate is playing music or talking, and yeah, you're
Yes,
tired,
exactly.
or you just worked out, or yeah,
You're going
okay.
fall into that state really easily. And so if you've ever been in a really noisy room where that same thing happens and you realize you just zoned and didn't hear what that person said, that's hypnosis. And so we can use that for negative things or for positive things. And so ideally in hypnotherapy, we're using that for positive things because we're reprogramming and we're using that state as a benefit to reprogram those messages that we already have. Now, if you're doing that while you're scrolling and an ad pops up for something you really don't need, well, then that's kind of a negative way that advertisers can capitalize on our hypnotic brain state. But ideally in hypnosis, and this is why it's really important to have a very ethical hypnotherapist, we're here for our client. So we're not here for our own agenda. And that is one of the first things that they go into in our classes is that we will all have a personal agenda. That's kind of natural. But you might think you know what's best for your client. However, your client is coming and telling you, this is what I want to work on. So you're here for your client, not for your own agenda, which makes it a safe container for the client to open up to hypnotic suggestion because they know that I'm always going to feed them their own desire to what they're wanting to work with or reprogram. Otherwise, it's manipulation. And hypnosis used in a wrong way can feel like, manipulation.
Yeah.
So that's why it's so important who your therapist is and that they have a strong sense of ethics and that they're on your team and that they're helping you build the goals that you're wanting to reach and go for because you'll have less resistance to the suggestions that are being made in hypnosis if they're always suggestions that you internally are wanting to create.
Thank you. So hypnosis kind of works as a way to potentially intentionally overload the brain.
Correct.
So that we can kind of go into this state, which you said is like between alpha and theta. So it feels kind of relaxed, kind of zoned out in a way, so that we are suggestible, so that we can kind of take the opportunity to reprogram or rewire some things. So then when a client is in this like suggestible, reprogrammable, rewirable state, then what are some of the things that come up like what happens next?
Sure. So ideally, the way that our inductions and deepeners are what take us into a state of hypnosis. And while some overload can feel negative in life, like anxiety is an overload that can put you into hypnosis. We are not wanting to create a state of anxiety in our clients. So the way that we do this is by layering sensory input. So oftentimes we'll have a background noise or white noise playing. We'll have them tune into and concentrate on their breath while also adding other elements, often numbers. So if you've ever seen like a hypnotist in a movie with the watch that goes back and forth, the timepiece that moves back and forth. So what that's doing is it's creating rapid eye movement, right? It's that back and forth eye pattern. So we do that through eye fascinations with closing and opening the eyes, blurring and focusing the eyes, focusing at the spot between the eyebrows with the eyes closed, and lifting that gaze till they start to your eyelids will start to flicker. That's creating that rapid eye movement. So we're overloading the system in ways that don't feel stressful to the system to get into that state of hypnosis. And as far as what comes out in a session, there's a couple of things that I hope set people at ease. There's not a lot of physical activity, and there's also not a lot of talking during the actual hypnotic state. So you're not going to just blab your most, secret. You're not going to do anything that you would be embarrassed about later or ashamed of. It's not stage hypnosis. So we're not asking our client to speak out loud or to do any actions. They're going internal and we're working with the information that they're hearing and allowing to kind of flow through their mind and their subconscious.
Got it.
So it's a very safe
Mhm.
container to be in. There's very little required from the client during the hypnosis process. They're just there to relax and observe.
Got it. So it might kind of be like in a meditation or getting a massage or a Reiki session or breath work where really like your job is just to be there and
Present, correct.
there's not really any, it's not like yoga. You're not going to be like, doing this physical kind of stuff.
Correct.
And there's
Yeah.
not really a lot that's going to be required in terms of speaking during the hypnosis session.
Right. There are, in some schools of therapy, with certain things that people might come work for, there may be more response or more physical activity, which I would talk to a client about and walk them through first. Sometimes I'll ask for ideomotor responses. These are things like lifting a finger.
Okay.
Or, so really that's me gauging what brain state they're in. It's more for my monitoring purposes than for them to do an action, or there are inductions that involve like arm raising or making one hand feel heavier or lighter than the other. Again, this is a sensory overload technique to get you into hypnosis, not an actual I'm forcing you to do a body action outside of your will purpose.
Got it.
So sometimes that can be confusing when you see something or an example of hypnosis that seems like someone's doing something outside of their will. Stage hypnosis is its own thing. That's its own brand of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, and they're looking for somnambulists. So there is a type of client called a somnambulist, which you can usually identify pretty easily, and those are the people who would act out what they're experiencing. But that is not the majority of clients, which kind of goes in. I know you had a question about who is hypnotizable.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a common misconception, is that only a certain amount of people are actually hypnotizable. And I hear that a lot. People say, I'm pretty sure you can't hypnotize me. Well, it's also a misunderstanding of what hypnosis is, because we view it sometimes as like this trance state where you're walking around mindlessly doing things. And that's really just somnambulists and how they might respond in a hypnosis trance. But again, they're suggestible too. So they're suggestible to what you're asking them to do more so than someone who's not a somnambulist would be. But in a hypnotherapy session, we're not asking anyone to cluck like a chicken or do these bodily actions. So even a somnambulist in my office is not going to be doing those types of things like they might on a stage show. But for everyone who's not a somnambulist, a big part of the first section of a hypnotherapy session is getting to know their language patterns, getting to understand what their suggestibility is. And there are some people who want to be told or guided through the different repatternings. And then there's others, the ones that come in that say, you can't hypnotize me. That's the first clue that they're a type of suggestible that wants to hypnotize themselves.
Okay.
And so, because they don't give over their authority then in that way. So I do a totally different kind of induction with someone like that, who would rather repattern their own thoughts. I guide them and have them respond back. They might speak more in a session than the other, because I'm giving them a prompt, and if they accept that prompt, they can repeat it to themselves.
I see.
So it's more self-directed in that sense. So everybody can use hypnotherapy tools, but we change how we do it based on how a person is more suggestible.
Cool. That's really neat to hear and learn about. So there's somnambulants. Am I saying that right?
Somnambulists, yes.
Somnambulists. And they are like, when you think of, stage hypnosis and clucking like a chicken, it's a particular type of person essentially that's highly suggestible.
Yes.
And then there's another two groups of folks.
Right. So there's P's and E's.
Okay.
essentially. So there's the physicals and the emotionals. And these terms were coined a long time ago. They can be kind of confusing because most people don't associate the emotionals as very emotional.
Mm,
So that one can be kind of misleading. But the physicals are the people who want you to tell them. They want you to direct them. They want you to literally walk through the steps with them and give them clear, guided, you will feel calm when you see this. When you
mm,
experience this in life, this is going to be your immediate feeling. For somebody who's an E or an emotional, they want inference. So they don't want to be told what to do. And if you tell them what to do, they're going to have resistance to it. They're going to put
mm,
up a resistance and block that suggestion. So instead, you will infer, when you see this, I wonder if you'll feel more
mm.
relaxed or if you'll feel more heavy. You're giving their brain options so they
Okay.
can choose how they want to feel.
Got it.
So that's the E. And then there's the two polar extremes. So an extreme of a P is a somnambulist. They're balanced. They can get induced with the literal or the inference. And then an extreme E is called an intellectual. So these are the sidelining small amounts of the population: somnambulists and intellectuals. An intellectual is 100% the person that will come in and say, I don't want you to tell me what to do. I
Mm,
don't want, I don't want to give over my authority or control. Am I going to say something that's not
mm,
okay?
mm.
Usually their first question. And so that's when you work with them and assure them that they get to guide the session. But that's a small percentage on those two kind of polar extremes. Most people fall somewhere in the middle where they can use both suggestions
Mm.
and literal direction. But you can identify somnambulists because they'll match body language and talking patterns with the person they're talking to. So
Ah,
that's how stage hypnotists can kind of watch in the audience and
okay.
figure out who to pull up, because it's the people who very easily like start mimicking their behavior. If they talk to
Cool.
them and they're shaking their head, that person is too.
Ah,
Or if they lean forward, that person will lean forward. Or they're the people who, if you start talking to them in an accent, they might start taking on that accent because they're just so
yeah,
suggestible to
yeah,
what
yeah.
they're empathizing, and they're
Mm,
moving into the energy of the person that they're with. And
mm-hmm,
so they're very open to suggestion,
hmm.
and it's a great way to be. But that's a stage show
Yeah.
hypnosis.
Um, so another question that I have is what kinds of things does hypnotherapy really help with? And what are some maybe behaviors or health concerns that someone might like hypnotherapy would really be beneficial for?
Sure. So most commonly it's used for things like stress and anxiety, addictions. I mean, you hear that a lot with hypnosis for like smoking cessation or alcohol addiction or things like that. Pain management is a huge one. So hypnobirthing, or people who have chronic pain. Pain management is a big one. Sports performance, life changes, patterns of decision making, changing your patterns of decision making. Relationship issues is a huge one.
Hmm.
Sexual dysfunction, life satisfaction, all of these things that we encounter on a daily basis and are making decisions out of probably past programming. So a lot of times, one of the most common things is relationship issues. Why do I keep picking the same person?
Mm,
Well, it probably leads back to 0 to 8 and something that you've internalized and that's in your subconscious. It's a need. It's a need that you're trying to fulfill in a person. And so you keep picking these same people because in some way they benefit your life in a
mm,
positive way, but it may not be a pattern you want to continue because in other ways maybe they're not beneficial
right.
for
They're
you.
the cake.
Exactly. They're the
Yeah.
cake. And so also health issues. So psychological and health issues do sometimes require a medical referral because you're working in tandem with a health professional or a psychiatric professional. But it's extremely beneficial in these situations. And I was thinking as we were coming up on this live, there's one example of an in client session that I would love to share that kind of
Yeah, please.
demonstrates this. And I'm changing all the details so there's no identifying factors. I don't have anyone named Lynn. Lynn is an imaginary person, but I'm going to use the name Lynn. But I have a woman that I was working with, and she came in originally for a chronic health issue. So this was a physical health symptom that she came in for. And she, as we got talking, session 3 or so, I start to uncover some of her issues with her childhood and her past. And so she was telling me about her mother and her aunt and her grandmother. And she said, my mother was an alcoholic and cheated on my dad. My aunt was an alcoholic and cheated on my uncle. My grandmother was an alcoholic and cheated on my grandpa. And their lives fell apart. In fact, my mother ended up homeless because she was so addicted to alcohol and this lifestyle. And she said, but I always really associated with my dad's side of the family. And I was so glad that I had my dad's last name instead of my mom's last name, because that whole side of the family, those are that last name people. But I identify with my dad's side of the family. And so I didn't go down that path. That's not what I picked or what I chose. But she had this chronic illness. And over time, this chronic illness had built to a place where she wasn't really much able to leave her house. Like really stayed at home most of the time, because anytime she'd go out, it would flare up these chronic issues. And so I think it was maybe session 3 or 4 in, I said, what would your life be like if you didn't have this chronic disease? Because I was thinking from a perspective of, let's imagine what could life be like if we didn't have this? What would it look like? And she said, I think I would go out drinking. And I think that drinking might lead me to cheat on my spouse. And that was when those two pieces clicked together. And I realized, oh, she's protecting herself with this and needs this to keep her in check right now, or feels like. And the body's being loving and it's saying, what are her ultimate goals? Her ultimate goals is she really does value her relationship because she doesn't want to screw it up. And she values her health and she doesn't want to screw that up. And so I asked her, do you trust yourself to make the decisions not to mess those things up? Because those are choices you don't want to make. So do you trust yourself to be able to go out and not make those choices? And she said, I don't think I do, because it's in my blood. That's in my history. And so that was the piece that was like what I'd call the breakthrough session of what we figured out. This is what we need to reprogram. I have integrity. I have integrity to make good choices. In fact, I have such high integrity that I created a body condition to protect me and protect the things that I value. And what are the things that I value? I value my marriage and I value my health. And so I can arrange my life in such a way that if I don't need this disease to monitor me or my behavior. And so I asked her what that would look like. And she said, well, I think I need to get up early and go to bed early, because nothing good happens after 10, right? And I want a really strong relationship with my spouse. So those 3 things would help her feel like from that space, she wouldn't need something external to monitor her behavior to keep her away from that. So that's just one example, but it's an example of where our body symptoms don't come from nowhere. You know, our body's loving and protective. And a lot of these things and these patterns that we develop between 0 and 8 it's the way that we coped. It's protective mechanisms that we learned because our body's loving and it's really trying to help us and meet the needs that we have. And so if we can find the roots of what those needs and fears are, then we can create a life where we don't need external things monitoring that for us. And we have freedom to choose our choices based on what's going to push us towards our best self.
Thank you for sharing that example. That's a really great example. So what else do we need to know about hypnotherapy? Maybe that I didn't ask, but I should have, or... I don't know.
Well, if anyone has any questions, they can pop them into the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I wanted to make sure and touch on kind of the myths, like what that
Yeah.
inaccurate perception of what hypnosis is, because it can feel scary if you're not really sure what that entails and what it looks
Mm-hmm.
like.
Mm-hmm.
And then who's a good candidate, what it's good for, what I've seen it help with. I find that it crosses all the lines of we're not just working with the mind or just working with the
Mm-hmm.
body or just working with the spirit or the energy. All of it's entwined. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I know what I want to make sure and mention. I realized this the other day in a session. So a session is usually 60 to 90 minutes.
Okay.
And about 3/4 of that session is talking. It's not being in hypnosis.
Mm.
So that is something that I want to convey to the client as an expectation, because I had a client say, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I spent most of this time talking your ear off." I said, "No, that's exactly what you're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be doing,
Mm-hmm.
because that's where I'm picking up what patterns are
Mm-hmm.
running, what you've had going this week that's happened as practical examples of how this is playing out in your life. And I'm noticing your language patterning so that when I'm speaking through hypnosis, I'm using the language you use, because just like a somnambulist, if I mirror that back, you don't put up the same level of resistance that you might to something that seems foreign or unknown. So a big portion of that is working with the critical mind, figuring out where you want things to shift and what's running. And then the last about 15 to 20 minutes are hypnosis.
Okay. One question that we just had come in was how many sessions does it usually take?
Mm-hmm. Depends what you're working on. So I would say first session, most people notice feeling much more relaxed and calm, and an understanding of where we're headed. By about session 3 or 4, there's some big shifts usually. Particularly if this is a new area that you haven't had much time to work on in the past, or it's uncovering something that has been buried really deep for a long time. It's usually right around that 3rd or 4th appointment, after talking through a lot of the things that are in the initial paperwork, that we get to, oh, this is what's running. And that's when shifts really start to happen. So I would say around sessions 3 or 4, that's where there's kind of sort of a breakthrough, and everybody's different. So I hate to say like this is the pattern, but that's what I
Right.
notice, is it's around that many sessions that we can really kind of identify what's running
For
and
one
make some shifts.
particular concern that they came in with, right? So like if
Right. Usually their
somebody,
initial presenting issue. What I find is that by about session 6 or 8, they feel great and they're bringing like other things to work on,
yeah,
because they're
yeah.
like, oh, now this whole area of my life is great. Let's do it for this
Mm-hmm.
one. So it's different. It's
Yeah.
different for everybody, but I would say the initial appointment is talking through, this is what hypnosis feels like.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some recordings to work with so that you learn how to slip in and out of hypnosis easily.
Mm-hmm.
You feel really relaxed. You feel some stress relief. And then about by 3 or 4, we're figuring out how you're wired and working with that original wiring.
One thing that I love that you offer is the recordings.
Mm-hmm.
And so especially for someone like me who is just like, I love homework.
Yeah.
But it's kind of a way to take this practice home.
Mm-hmm.
Before you hopped on here today, I was just kind of chatting about how like what a nerd I am, and like I am just like the lover of the science, the lover of homework. Like I am just like a really good student at heart. So I think that's a really cool thing. And your hypnotherapy practice that you offer is a way for people to, outside of the one-on-one session with you, to also continue this practice on their own at home.
And you're going to see so much more, have it affect your life in such a fuller way when you do the homework. And so I have one client in particular that asks me for homework, give me the homework. and comes every time prepared with his notebook and comes in and he's got pages and pages that he's written about what he's working through. And right now he's writing his autobiography because of how much this has changed his life.
Wow.
And so absolutely you get what you put in.
Mm, cool. Well, thank you so much for making the time to be here
Of
today and to
course. Thank you for
share.
having me.
Yeah, this has been really fun. Next week, I have an herbalist coming on.
Yes, I saw that. I kind
Yes.
of like know of her, but
Yeah, so I'm super excited. Amy Hardy McAdams.
yeah.
If you have any questions after watching this today about hypnotherapy and you want to reach out to Jennifer, please do that. I have her tagged here in this video. And if there's someone that you know that might benefit or think that this chat is really interesting, invite them to the group. All of these chats are available for 30 days and then they disappear. So this is like a watch it or it goes away, to incentivize you to devote the
Watch it
time
now.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So thank you guys for being here. Thank you guys for watching. If you're watching live or you watched live, go ahead and give us like a little swirly eye emoji. And if you are watching on the replay, give us a little thumbs up. So let's just end with one deep breath together. You can do this with us if you're watching too. We'll inhale in through the nose and then exhale out through the mouth. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.